finally find her brother, and the first thing that happens is he tries to dip and kiss her for saving his life. Hello players and GMs, I am Reese and welcome to another video by Jetpack7. Before we get started today, I just want to remind you to please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Your comments seriously mean the world to me, and the amount of support you all show for every single video is incredible. I know it may feel like a very small gesture for you to subscribe or like or comment or whatever, but it honestly does give me the fuel to keep moving forward in the midst of rather trying times. That and coffee. And if you're as important to me as coffee, that means something. Lately, I've been spending more and more time browsing the wondrous world of Reddit. Wondrous may be an unconventional way to describe it, but it honestly does contain some of the internet's finest content, including one of my favorite subreddits, D&D stories. As I was browsing these posts, I realized that I really wanted to respond to some of them, as a few elicited a pretty visceral reaction even while I was just reading them quietly to myself. So this week, I grabbed a few of them without really having read through them, and we're going to go through this experience together. You're going to have to watch me read these for the first time, so enjoy that. Okay, so to start off, we have Ranger Zed, who says, my first DM in 5th grade. 5th grade? You guys are already playing D&D in 5th grade? My first DM in 5th grade used D&D as a way to manipulate his friends during recess/lunch. I'm sorry, that's funny. So long as we remained on his good side, the loot was plentiful and enemies were slain with ease. Don't feel like sharing your fruit snack? A rock falls on your head and you die. This kid's going somewhere. Whoever that DM is, a 5th grader who has the wherewithal to use D&D to improve the number of fruit snacks that he gets during lunch he's already probably the CEO of something. No, but honestly, don't use D&D to manipulate your friends. I've heard of people like getting personal with some of their campaigns and starting to want to punish their players for behaving a certain way or whatever, and that is kind of crazy to me. I feel like that's kind of wacky to do, but in 5th grade, if you're already doing that and you're getting extra fruit snacks out of it, then I encourage it. I think it's harmless and funny, but mostly funny. Saruja says, I ran into a group where my DM gives your character's backstory to you. Ugh. I had one written up and was telling my idea to the DM, and they just told me within 10 seconds not to bother. They will provide one for me. Played only a few sessions before that group broke up, but never did get a backstory. Wow, okay. So not only did this DM not allow you to write your own backstory, which doesn't make sense to me, they also told you they were going to write your backstory for you and never did. So I'm gonna go behind the scenes and I'm gonna tell you what actually happened with this DM. This DM is just really lazy. What happened is this DM had an idea for exactly how this campaign was going to go. They knew exactly what was going to happen from the first session to the last session. They were going to railroad the absolute living crap out of all of you players, and your backstory may have been able to cause some sort of interference in that well laid out plan that they've already established would happen. So that is what they did. They decided that the proper response to you, instead of writing your own backstory, was to shut down your backstory and then not even come up with one for you. So I'm glad your group broke up. It sounds like that wasn't a campaign you should have been playing in either way. But DMs, if you feel the urge to do this, then I think you should change your mindset a little bit. I have very light experience in improv, and a classic part of improv is when someone else that you're doing a scene with gives you an identity or some sort of, I don't know, they give you something to play with. They say, like, if you walk up to someone and they say, hey, you're looking an awful lot like ice cream today, then in an improvisational setting, you have to act like you're looking like ice cream all day. I don't know what the heck that means, but you can interpret it how you will. In improv, we call that a gift. So when someone gives you information that you can play with, that is a gift. And that is exactly what your players are doing in D&D. When they come to you with a very elaborate backstory with a lot of space that you can start to fill in the blanks, then that is an opportunity for you as the DM to put that into your story, add that to the overall narrative of the campaign, and not only will it create a rich storyline, it'll also make the players feel like their character is a part of that world. It will feel more immersive for them. So I highly recommend not only letting your players write their backstories, but taking the time to integrate that into your story. Vorengard says, I had a DM whose NPCs all hated us. Every single NPC reacted angrily to everything we said or did. Even when we offered to help them, they'd just get angry and go off all, we don't need your help, go away. It made the entire game feel hostile and nasty, not to mention unfun when you can't get any quests because all the NPCs hate you. Oh, that last bit takes it to another level. So I've had campaigns where NPCs are very negative towards the players, and it is a rough experience. Honestly, it is pretty hard to play because you want to feel like the heroes. That's what 5e is all designed around. That's what D&D is all designed around, is it's supposed to make you feel like you are a group of heroes that are saving the world from some sort of devastation or destruction or whatever. And when all the NPCs in the world hate you, it suddenly makes you feel like you're not a hero at all. It makes you feel like the enemy, which can be a fun campaign depending on what kind of group you're running, but most of the time, if you are saving the world, you want people to be open to you. No one likes being constantly surrounded by negativity in the real world, and that doesn't change in D&D. People come to D&D to escape things. They want it to be a fantasy experience. They don't want it to just be getting shit on by everyone they meet. So even though it might be tempting as a DM to make NPCs adversarial to your player characters, I encourage DMs usually to make friendly NPCs. And even though they might be standoffish, they might be kind of, they might be sarcastic or something like that, at the end of the day, they should want to work with the PCs unless they have a very specific reason not to. In that case, they're usually part of the overarching narrative and there's some character that's going to be more important otherwise. But like a shopkeeper, every shopkeeper shouldn't be opposed to the player characters unless they caught the player characters trying to rob them or something like that. I personally would think about it as sort of a video game. If you've ever played an Elder Scrolls game, you know the NPCs you run into are neutral towards you until you give them a reason to like you or a reason to dislike you. And in D&D, I take that even one step further, and I assume that the NPCs, unless they have a very specific personality quirk, are friendly to the party, and then if the party gives them a reason, then they'll be a little hostile to them. And that also kind of makes sense with the D&D terminology of like charm person and something. When a creature is friendly to you or hostile towards you, neutral to me is kind of leaning into friendly, in my opinion. And I think that'll just make for a better experience all around for all the players and the DM, because it'll just allow people to get things to work. But this takes it even one step further when they say that they can't even get quests from NPCs. And that just feels weird to me. Why would you create NPCs that have quests but then make them hate the player characters and not give them the quests? To me, if I had to assign perhaps a reason that might be happening, is that maybe the DM wasn't prepared. And when they had this quest line that they were going to give you, and the party said, hey, we'd like to pursue that quest line, the DM was like, I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared. And so then they just make the NPC very standoffish and angry and all that. But overall, I think it's best in a game of D&D to make sure to establish a relationship with your players that they understand that you're not playing against them. And that is kind of like the base unspoken social contract of D&D. Of any RPG, really. And when you have all of your NPCs being hostile or aggressive towards your player characters, then that kind of all goes out the window and your players will start to play against you as the DM, and that just isn't a fun experience for either group. My first ever D&D session, start at level 8. Really? Start at level... Okay, well, first of all, don't start a D&D campaign at level 8. Unless you're playing with experienced players. If you are a first ever D&D player, you should not be starting at level 8. Go in a dungeon where we slay about 2k of goblins. I'm gonna guess this is 2k XP of goblins, which is still, I'm hoping that's a massive exaggeration, because I think goblins are worth 25 XP. So deep down at the end of the cavern, we find an ancient red dragon. You're fighting an ancient red dragon at level 8? Oh man. While we run from it, the dragon flies too high and hits an adamantine stalactite, which kills him instantly. We level up to like level 15 and find epic loot and 1 million gold. What? We go back to the city to buy some equipment for the next adventure. We get to the marketplace where we are caught flat-footed by a bunch of epic thieves who leave us completely naked and tied up in a rope. Also, they were vampires, so we're back to level 5 due to negative levels. What the fuck, DM is right? Okay, So we've got a lot to unpack here. First of all, like I said, don't start your players out at level 8. Unless they are experienced players, they should be starting out at very low levels because the game gets more and more complicated the later you go on. And if anyone has ever played an MMO where you can just like max out a character right away, you know that it is overwhelming to immediately have all the spells and all the attacks and all the features that you have at a high level character right away. It's much simpler to be able to build up to that and learn one feature at a time. Starting out at level 8, you go into a dungeon, okay, this is too many. 2,000 goblins or 2,000 XP worth of goblins is still like 1,000 goblins. It's way too much. It's way too much. That is boring. It's not exciting. I guarantee you the players were not having a good time. That is too much mindless combat. And then at the end of that dungeon, you find an ancient red dragon, to which the players will respond, logically, by running away. Because at level 8, unless you have a really big party, you're probably not going to be able to take down an ancient red dragon, which is the strongest of all of the dragons. Ancient red is the strongest by the book dragon. So that is going to be a very difficult encounter. I think it's like CR 20, 21, 24 or something ridiculous like that. Then the part I really don't understand is how after they run into the dragon and they start running away, the dragon like Three Stooges itself and just kills itself on an adamantine stalactite that was in the dungeon. So somehow the DM was either reacting, realizing that they made a huge mistake, and they were just like, oh, oops, you killed the dragon. You know what? I think that is what happened. I think the DM realized that they made a huge mistake. They have you all fighting the dragon. All of you probably react pretty violently and start screaming, run away, run away. And then after the DM realizes, oops, they might not be ready to fight a dragon, he says, I'm gonna kill the dragon. So he kills the dragon on an adamantine stalactite, and then when you all get to the dragon's hoard, he realizes that he messed up even more by leaving a hoard of 1 million gold and epic magic items, but he can't take that back now. You all killed the dragon. So what does he do? He takes you to town, introduces thieves that can apparently beat people who killed an ancient dragon, and he robs you blind and sends you back to level 5, where you should have started from the beginning. Honestly, I think this is likely another just DM attempt at recovery. In all likelihood, your DM realized that they messed up and that they needed to go back to the top and start out from level 5, clean slate. It's not a bad idea. I don't disagree. I think that was right. But the methodology was a little unconventional. Namely, just talk to your players. If you messed up that royally and you gave your players too much loot, or if you leveled them up from 8 to 15 in a single encounter, that's a big error, and that's a campaign ruining error. That can absolutely destroy a campaign. So what you do in that situation, if you find yourself in that royal screw up of a situation by you, the DM, then just talk to your players, admit that you messed up, and they will agree to move back. As you can tell, they already weren't happy that they were starting at level 8. They listed it in a list of complaints. So just have an open line of communication with your players, make them understand that you messed up and that you want to move back to where you started and you want to try again. Take 2. That's all it is. And honestly, I think that would be perfectly fine. Your players would forgive you, they'd understand that you messed up, and then you'd be able to play a good campaign of D&D where this kind of madness isn't happening. I think that's a reasonable solution. Spook Cakes says, had a fighter whose brother had been sold into slavery by bandits, and so her starting goal was simply to find him and get him back. He was all she had left of her family after all. Finally find her brother, and the first thing that happens is he tries to dip and kiss her for saving his life. DM skim read the backstory and thought the reason she wanted to save the guy's life was because he was her lover. It was incredibly awkward. Yeah, I would imagine that is, first of all, that's what happened in Star Wars. So maybe it was just a misunderstanding. You know, maybe your DM could play it off as just a kind of Luke and Leia situation. Oops. But honestly, all that comes down to is DMs, read your player's backstory. Give the backstory the love that it deserves. Read through it, make sure you know the details, don't try and improvise stuff. I guess it could have just been a misunderstanding. Maybe the DM did read it all the way through, but just kind of misinterpreted a couple things. I don't know. Either way, that's just kind of a funny happenstance and is very awkward, but I wouldn't necessarily say that that's a that's a huge DM nightmare story by any means. But it could create some funny moments for roleplay in the future, I guess. Maybe this guy didn't recognize his sister or something like that. I don't know. Maybe he was delusional from being a prisoner or whatever. You can play it off, it won't ruin the campaign, and it'll be funny. But at the end of the day, DMs, read your characters' backstories. And lastly, we have a longer one from Hungry Hungry Horkers. So I'm just gonna kind of skim through and get to the bottom. So from what I'm seeing, there's a DM who this person has never played with and was a little awkward, apparently making people uncomfortable in the lounge that they were playing in, and everyone brings in their player characters, but apparently this DM brings in a DMPC. For those who don't know the terminology, it is a player character that the DM operates. Not always a bad thing, but generally a lot of people aren't a fan of a DMPC, and this is likely one of those cases. Hungry Hungry Horker says, so we're meeting with the king, and then the queen shows up and just starts showering the DMPC with praise, calling him the hero of the land and exhorting his accomplishments, and it's basically just an awkward few minutes of listening to the DM talk about how awesome his character is. Hey, you know, you gotta admire the confidence. We go on a quest to investigate at a nearby mine. Okay, finally some adventure. Well, it turns out that the DMPC is a level 20 paladin, we're all level 1, and the DMPC proceeds to annihilate all of the enemies in the mine, including one-shotting a Balor and banishing a demon prince back to whatever hell it came from. All we could do was watch. Holy crap. That's actually really funny. Terribly, that's not a good time. This DM made his players into spectators of his one-person campaign. This guy was literally running his own player character through a level 1 adventure, but made it a level 20 adventure, kind of. The level 20 character killed a Balor and a demon prince, and that was for his level 1 player characters. So I don't know if this guy just came in with a different adventure and didn't prep anything else, was just like, yeah, I have an adventure for like 15th level adventurers, but then they asked him to run a level 1 shot, a level 1 campaign, and he was like, sure, I've got an adventure for that, and he brought in his level 20 PC. That's pretty embarrassing. We then went back to the castle to tell the king we had cleared the mine, and when the king came out, the DMPC killed him. Oh man. Do I even need to read that part? Declaring himself the new king. The new king then offered us a quest. I don't even remember what that quest was, because at that point we all just decided to get up and leave. That's a rough one. I mean, yeah, that's a nightmare DM right there. That is absolutely a nightmare DM. I have heard complaints about DMPCs. I have heard them get pretty bad. I've heard them get kind of like the story kind of ends up revolving around them, or they take up too much roleplay time or combat time or whatever. But that is something else entirely. This guy, I don't know what's going on with this DM, but he needed a confidence boost or something like that, because he made his own character, brought it in, which at its core isn't a big deal. If you're running like a small party, then it's honestly not a bad idea to have a DMPC, and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything honestly gives some companion ideas that aren't bad or game breaking at all, because it can help balance out the party when you're only playing with like 3 people. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but when you're running it, you want to make sure that you're not taking up more time than any of the other players, because you're the DM. You're the person running the game. You want the players to be the focal point of the story, not this NPC that you've created that will play with the party. So if you run it like that, it's not necessarily a bad thing. This is bad. Running a level 1 adventure and putting them up against a Balor and a Demon Prince, and then just having your level 20 DMPC go through and clear everything isn't fun. It's not fun at all. It's like one of those intro quests in an RPG where you just kind of sit back and watch the epic level NPCs kill the bosses that you will eventually have to fight at the end of the game. It's not fun. It doesn't give you any narrative value in a one-shot. In a long-form campaign, maybe, Maybe watching an epic battle happen will give you something to look forward to as low-level player characters, if that's kind of like the narrative direction that you're going. If you encounter a villain in your first session that you will have to fight well later in that campaign, then that's an intelligent use of a villain. That's not a terrible idea. But in a one-shot, that's a huge mistake. That is such a huge mistake. And I'm not even mentioning the fact that this PC came back, killed the king, made love to the queen, and then declared himself the king. That is honestly hilarious. It sounds like a sitcom. This guy seems like someone you'd see in some sort of sitcom representation of what a bad DM looks like, because that is absolutely terrible. That is an unacceptable style of DMing, and I am very sorry you had to go through that, hungry horker. All right, those are all the bad DM stories I've got for today. I hope you all enjoyed this video because I really enjoyed making it. Reading D&D nightmare stories and talking about them has always been a guilty pleasure of mine, so please let me know in the comments below some of your worst DM or player stories, and who knows, maybe they'll end up in a future video someday. Either way, I can't wait to see what you all say, but until then, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you around.